The climate that we're operating under has everyone on the defensive.
You see a person and you automatically put them in a box and say, well, this is what this person should be like.
Strangers in the coffee shop, strangers on the subway, everybody is on the defensive.
All of this ostracizing people, what are we afraid of?
We're called to love one another. It can't be, I reject you as a person.
This country's been through so much. Its people has been through so much. Why can't we fix this?
Do we have issues we have to deal with? Yes, we do. But we're not going to be able to deal with them if we're fighting and yelling at each other and not listening.
It was important for me to meet somebody who didn't have horns and a tail.
Yeah, she has an accent. Oh, gosh, she dressed funny. But we're talking the same thing. We're all concerned about our children, we're concerned about the world we live in.
A lot of people wouldn't even think we should be here talking to each other, but I'm sorry, I disagree.
We are connected in probably 12 different ways I can think of right like that. Yeah, I can give you a hug.
Hello, I'm Quentin Hope, the founder and a longtime volunteer of High Plains Public Radio. Thank you for joining us tonight as part of HPPR's partnership with StoryCorps and their One Small Step initiative. Since its inception more than 40 years ago, HPPR has served to convene communities and bring people together in conversation. Over the past few months, we've invited residents of the High Plains, primarily people who didn't know each other and held differing political views, to interview one another and discover what they have in common. It's part of a nationwide effort by a select group of public radio stations to encourage civil conversation and community building. Roughly 300 people took part in these conversations this year, including more than 50 from HPPR service area. In just a few minutes, we'll feature a couple of conversations from the High Plains, but first let's sample some of the excerpts from this year's national conversations.
What made you want to do this interview today?
Seems to me like we live in a time that people don't listen as well as perhaps they used to.
I live in a tiny village where there are about 50 or 60 people. I just kind of thought it'd be fun to see what people outside of the village sound like.
Hola, mi nombre es Diego Sarazúa. Nos encontramos en Nevada.
I live in Bakersfield, California.
And we're in beautiful Amarillo, Texas.
I get a lot of joy out of just conversations with people.
Well, you know what? I enjoy talking to people too. That's a real Oklahoma thing, isn't it?
I think it is.
Could you briefly describe in your own words your personal political values?
That's a loaded question, huh?
Yeah.
I would describe myself as a fiscally conservative person.
I'm definitely more liberal leaning.
I don't know. I don't even know if conservative means what conservative used to mean. I'm not even sure liberal means what it used to mean.
If we didn't know each other and I met you on the road and you had a flat tire and I'm going to help you, I have no care what your politics are.
Exactly. That's Kansas.
In Alaska, sometimes you got to humble yourself and say, hey, what's your perspective on this? Can you help me out?
We depend on one another up here.
Yeah.
I want to believe that people who maybe have different points of view still have the same end goals in life and can talk about things without being upset with each other. Was I who you expected me to be?
Yes and no. Like, you're more human than the archetype in my head, obviously.
Well, I'm glad.
Qué bonita tu historia. Gracias por todo eso.
I just really enjoyed this conversation, actually. So, I mean,
I have too. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah, Dan, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Hey, Nick, if you find yourself planning to be in the St. Albans area, give me a shout. Be glad to show you my orchards.
That would be awesome.
I am honored to have met you.
I will treasure this friendship. Thank you so much.
We're fortunate tonight to be joined by Dave Isay, the founder of StoryCorps. Dave, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Well, I'm very, very happy to be here.
Maybe we could start off, first of all, by just your discussing what the idea was behind StoryCorps, and how One Small Step takes this in a different direction.
Sure. In many ways, we're in the human connection business. And this gets into One Small Step. 6 years ago, I started thinking along with the leadership of StoryCorps about this rift that was opening up in the country, this toxic polarization. We're not talking about issues of arguing with each other across the political divides, which is healthy and part of what happens in a functioning, healthy democracy. It's about people starting to hate each other and dehumanizing each other across the divides, which is extremely, extremely dangerous. That's called toxic polarization or affective polarization. There are many words for it, but since 5 or 6 years ago, when we started thinking about it, it's gotten much worse in this country. I mean, there are polls that probably everybody's seen. More than half of all Americans say the greatest threat to this country comes from our fellow citizens now. We think our most dangerous enemies are our neighbors. We've gone from disagreeing with one another to hating one another. And that's extremely dangerous. And we started thinking, what can we do with StoryCorps as a human connection organization to maybe help ameliorate this growing toxicity a little bit, and came up with this idea, which eventually was named One Small Step. Named One Small Step because it is just one very, very small step. We reconfigured, so our Hippocratic oath, the oath that we give to participants is when you come into StoryCorps, you leave to record an interview, you leave better off than when you came in. Outside of public radio, I mean, I think that there's a lot of talk about media as extractive. You do an interview with someone and you take something from them. And what we guarantee, what we must do is make sure that when someone comes in to record an interview, it's a gift to them, that they leave better off than when they walked in. So we tested for 4 or 5 years, developed and tested this new methodology, which became One Small Step. The operational, the definitional difference between One Small Step and the original signature StoryCorps is the 650,000 people who have participated in StoryCorps know and love each other. Usually it's intergenerational. It's a grandparent and a grandkid. Sometimes it's friends, parents and their kids. And the difference with One Small Step is that it's an interview between strangers. And it looks a little bit like a StoryCorps interview, but under the hood is quite different than a StoryCorps interview. Again, after years of testing this and modifying it and retrying it and modifying it, we came up with this really beautiful interview experience. And I'll talk about it for a couple seconds because I know some of the folks will have participated. Some folks will be thinking about participating. Takes a little bit of courage, but is absolutely remarkable experience. We've had thousands of people participate in One Small Step so far. We launched officially about 6 months ago as a national project. And what happens is you fill out a form and you talk a little bit about your politics and you write a bio of yourself. And we have a special computer program that matches you with someone across the political divides. You receive their bio, just their first name. You don't know what their last name is, who they are. You can't Google them. And you're connected. We do this all over video. And I know that this is being done through facilitators at High Plains Public Radio. So you're connected with the stranger and you start by reading the bio of your partner to your partner, and your partner reads his or her bio to you, and then you have a 50-minute conversation. Not to talk, you can talk about anything you want, and we give you guidelines about what to talk about, but the idea is not to talk about politics, just to get to know each other as a human being, under the premise that it's under the truth that it's hard to hate up close. We know that there's this, many billion-dollar hate industrial complex out there that's trying to divide us in media and social media. So it's a real David and Goliath kind of push. But we are going to give it everything we've got, because in this moment of such uncertainty, the only thing we know for certain is that if this affective, toxic polarization takes over, if we stop seeing each other as human beings, if we see people across the political divides as less than human, it's not going to end well for anybody. It's a zero-sum game that's going to end in a disaster for this country. So we're thrilled that High Plains Public Radio is involved, and we want everyone to participate, and we want everyone to spread the word about what we're doing. We also are launching kind of a massive public health campaign to shift social norms. So, it's not a great analogy, but, at one point smoking was cool and sexy. And then, there was a massive campaign around smoking, and it wasn't cool and sexy anymore. And right now, treating people across the divides on Twitter and elsewhere like garbage is cool and sexy. And if we're successful, and there's no guarantee we will be, but it won't be cool and sexy anymore.
It's been a real joy bringing One Small Step to the High Plains. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Well, you guys give it life. So thank you so much. And it's been great to be here. Thank you, Will.
Thank you for joining us for this One Small Step conversations and reflections today. I'm Deborah Bolton. I am one of the facilitators for High Plains Public Radio's One Small Step, and those are conversations among people who often have differing points of view. But what we found is people make connections no matter their points of view, and we're really excited that you've joined us this evening for this listening event. And I hand it over to my partner, Lynn Boitano.
Hi, Deborah, and welcome, and thank you for joining the One Small Step virtual listening event. I'm Lynn Boitano. I'm a co-facilitator with Deborah Bolton, and for this very, very unique experience of witnessing two people come together in conversation and speak about their experiences and their beliefs. And so, Deborah, this was a remarkable experience, wasn't it? How was this experience of being a facilitator for you?
Well, I certainly felt honored to be part of the project, and we learned a lot along the way. I know you and I have been working in radio for 25, 30 years, and all these different aspects of it. In all of that time, I can safely say I'd never done something like this before. I've done news reporting where you interview people, and I've done interviews and all that, but to actually facilitate two people, often with those differing points of view, and having those two people, watching them make those connections. I mean, there were times where it was so poignant. The facilitator had tears in her eyes, and it was just really a remarkable experience, as you say, because I don't know, I think it changes us in some ways, in the sense that with the division of our country that we've been experiencing over these few years, we're seeing that people really want to make a connection with one another. They just often don't have the opportunity, or don't have that facilitator to say, ask this. What do you think of this? Yes, dig a little deeper here. So yeah, that was mine. What about yours, Lynn?
Well, it absolutely was such a privilege to witness the One Small Step conversations, where they have varying perspectives, really open up their hearts and minds to each other. And, we say, there's something that we have said during this process, listening is powerful, but listening with an open heart and an open mind can be transformational. And we witnessed that happening between participants. For example, there was a former state house representative that was one of our participants, and he was paired with a woman that is a single mom of 3. 2 are at home, 1 is grown, and she has a job that's a very fulfilling job for her. She's a librarian. However, she makes $15 an hour, and she's raising her family on that. And she shared with him her struggle, her challenges, her hopes. And he looked at her and he said, I so wish that my colleagues in the legislature could have met you. And to me, I just got tingles, because that speaks so much. His experiences were broadened by being matched with her. And he wanted his colleagues in the State House to experience her as well, her situation. There was another parent.
I was going to say one that I had that made me think of that same thing. I had a student who's a college student, and I think she's a sophomore, and I paired her with a school teacher. And I paired them based on their political outlooks and how they looked at religion, for example. But what came out of that was a pairing that I had no idea would be so impactful for both of them. So I learned in that she is studying to be a school teacher. Mm-hmm. And she wanted to focus on family and consumer sciences, I think, something like that. And he's a music teacher. Oh, I take that back. That's a different student. This student is majoring in voice and music. And it so happened he's a debate coach, but he's a musician. Mm-hmm. And the two of them started talking about being a school teacher. And at the end, she was just, she said, I would have never believed I would not have expected this, but I don't feel like this was a conversation to find common ground. I feel like this was professional development for me. I just love that. It was just choice the way she said that, because he's toward the end of his teaching career and she's going to be a teacher. And it reminded me of that story of those two that you paired, that one was just getting into politics and one was a seasoned veteran of politics.
Absolutely. In Dodge City, we had a person that had spent a lot of his life in politics at the legislature and at the executive level of Kansas. And he was 65, paired with another young man whose family came from Mexico to this country and settled and worked very hard. He grew up in Cimarron, Kansas. And he went off to become a lawyer and came back to his community in Dodge City because he felt like he wanted to represent underrepresented people. He wanted to give back to his community. They both had a community spirit, but one of the older participant and the younger participant, one at the beginning and one at the end of his political career. And so he gave him some advice. And then also the younger person had things to share with our older participant that resonated with him as well. A sister and brother that grew up in the same family, but they were almost 10 years apart. And they made this kind of revelation that she grew up they have different worldviews. She identified herself as liberal. He identified himself as conservative. And they came to this sort of aha moment during the conversation that the time period that she came from, Nancy, was the 60s and 70s. And the one that Eric, her younger brother, came of age in was the Reagan 80s. And so you witness this right there, this kind of aha moment that will have implications for their relationship going forward.
It makes me think of two other conversations that I had where, you like we say, we pair them looking at certain aspects of what they answer in a questionnaire, but then you start looking at them. I had these two gentlemen, and they did have differing political views, and they talked about that. But as I was looking at them, they were like polar opposites. They both had long hair to their waists. One was white hair and one was very dark hair. They both had kind of matching goatees in the sense, but again, the color there. And what was really great at the end where they say, what did you expect of me, or was I what you expected? And the person who identified as conservative said, well, at least you're not this crazy, but he said, at the end of the day, I think I'd like to have a beer with you. And then the other one said, a beer? Oh, what kind of beer do you like? So they absolutely made these great connections over the beers that they liked, but then they found other connections too. And then I had two women who both emigrated to this country from another place, one from Hungary and one from Mexico, and both very well educated women and differing points of view, but really found some great connections that way. And and then we went out and searched for people. I think that was one of the fun things that you and I did. I had two people who came from the same area of India, for example, but then one had moved away to a different part of India, so they were comparing and contrasting, and sometimes I was just speechless. Two women very engaged in the same faith upbringing, but one was coming away because of because of different things happening in that church, in the church in general. And the younger one advised the older one. She said, if you stick with the abject truth, you'll be able to keep focused, but you have to know humans are imperfect and humans make mistakes. And it was just such a great moment to see that exchange from a younger person who really had her way set, and the older person who had experienced and was starting to question some things. So that was another great one I had.
Well, and these conversations occurred virtually, like we're doing now. They also occurred, we had 8 conversations where they were in person, and where we met in Dodge City. You had secured a partnership with the
Lead for America.
Lead for America. And so we were able to conduct several in-person interviews in Dodge City. And that was a different experience too, coming together, which is the original intent of One Small Step before COVID came. Then they had to, what's that word that they say, pivot and go to virtual. What were some of the challenges? Even though I say challenges, they're challenges in a good way, because when you're committed to a project like this, you see the value of it. The challenges are just problem-solving things.
Well, yeah. Well, if you think about the only challenge I ever experienced during our 26 conversations, technical, like if you did a virtual, who had good connections. Like I just finished one the other day. I wasn't clear that you needed to be on a computer of some kind. The person was trying to do this by phone, and when we're feeding them questions and that sort of thing. So it took us about 20 minutes because she shut everything down, and then she did have an iPad, which helped a little bit. And so I would say the biggest challenge for the virtual was just differing equipment. The only challenge I could think of for the face-to-face was noises. You're like the last time we did virtual, we were in a library and they gave us a study room, which was very nice. And and no squeaky chairs. But I remember one of the first face-to-face that I did, it was in a kitchen, and beautiful furniture, but kind of antique furniture. So it was squeaky. So when one of them shifted, you could hear those kinds of things. But I think as far as challenges, I don't even feel like the people were challenged in a negative way by one another. They were challenged. And what I found, we were very clear. This is not so you can change each other's perspectives. This is so you can widen each other's perspectives. And that's the beauty of One Small Step.
I think for me, one of the things that we wanted to get right was the pairings. Because we had a number of people. There were 64 people, I think, right now that have signed up the questionnaire and are in our system that we got to match from. Of course, we did outreach to bring people in so we could match people in that. But it was so important to us to make sure that the matches were meaningful for the participants. So that was not a challenge, but just something we wanted to make sure we paid attention to, and that there's an alchemy to it.
Oh,
and
I see.
Unexpected things happen as well. So I think that would be one of my challenges, just to make sure that the pairings that we made were meaningful for the participants.
And I also think this only happened with one face-to-face interview. The person who identified as progressive with the person who identified as conservative, I wasn't clear enough. You are not to change each other's minds. You're just, you state your preference, and then the other person does. And I found the person who identified as progressive was trying to change his mind, and I'm in the background. With virtual, you can slip the notes. That's not your job, and I'm in the background going, you didn't really want to stop it. No, you're just stating your preference. You're not trying to change his mind. And so I think, if you were calling it challenges, that could have been one, but it ended really well. They hugged. It was a great thing to witness. And I would have to say, how this has changed me, it helps me to state my preference and not try to change someone's mind, but just by stating what I believe is maybe transformational, because it will widen someone's perspectives, like we saw with the people politically that you were talking about, early legislators, and then also with the school teacher and the student studying education. You saw people from these opposite perspectives coming together, saying, I think I'd like to spend some time with you. And I love that. That would have been my great one. And I would just have to say, I think as you are listening to some of the stories that we're going to share today, I think you'll hear some of those transformations and that widening of perspective, making those connections. And if you experience that, then we've done our job.
I agree 100%, Deborah. I think takeaways for me are that people are hungry for genuine connection, and finding common ground with each other. And in fact, oftentimes at the end of the conversation, they wanted to keep in touch, but they are hungry to make those connections. And then also many of the participants, regardless of their different perspectives, whether it's on government spending or the COVID vaccines or environmental issues, they were all in consensus that they were tired of the acrimony. They were tired of the division, the extremes of uncivilized behavior, and truly hope that our country can come together. That was the message, that they really hope our country can come together and that our better angels prevail.
That was the theme, certainly. Throughout all of these conversations, it was the theme. We've made this connection. Why can't other people do this? So I think we have to get a lot more people involved. But again, I think as we share these stories with you, you'll find that same connection. And I hope that you will continue to make one small step toward connections with people in your neighborhood, in your community, in your world, to find that connection.
Normally, we have two people in an OSS conversation that are meeting each other either virtually or in person for the first time. However, in this case, our paired participants are brother and sister. So Nancy and Eric, while growing up in the same family, have 9 years between them. So they see their worldviews as being influenced by the time that they came of age. Nancy during the civil rights, women, and environmental movements, and Eric in the Reagan conservatism of the 1980s. Here they address the issue of getting the COVID vaccine. Nancy got hers right away, and Eric was a little more hesitant.
We had many, many discussions about getting a vaccine, and you were reluctant to do that. Could you share what changed in your mind?
I think the fact that it got FDA approved was helpful. I think, I wasn't in a hurry to get the vaccine. I wasn't an anti-vaxxer, although I think I've listened to enough of the anti-vaccine arguments to make you go, there's some real valid points to some of the treatment. I have never had any real concerns about COVID. It never did and still don't in terms of whether that's naive or not. But I mean, it didn't change my world or my life. And
so you didn't feel any reassurance getting it.
No.
You did it because you felt it was the right thing to do. It was
no, I mean, it's approved now, and I think this Delta variant makes it more. It's not going to go away. I'm talking to other people who aren't fear-based people with COVID, saying they think the vaccine makes sense, and they think it's a smart move. But when I took it, did I all of a sudden do I feel like I can go places I couldn't go before more comfortably? No.
Well, you've gone anywhere you wanted to the entire time.
Well, and I think it's a really dangerous place to live in fear. And I think when you talk about COVID, for example, we've never had the conversation really as a country, what has been the cost of the choices we did make? I mean, the mental health cost, the addiction cost, the drug cost. I know people who are medicating now. I know people who just about lost their business. I know people who were forced to shut down for months, who panicked, who were fearful, who didn't want to leave the house. What a horrible thing to do. And I look back and I think, was it ever justified? I got to tell you, I'm going, I don't know, and I'm not trying to minimize it because it obviously impacts some people severely. But oh my gosh, we took something and that I absolutely don't think the approach was needed to be done like it was done. But I also try to give them a little bit of benefit of the doubt that they didn't really know what to do.
Well, that's the other thing about the vaccine. If people get vaccines, all of a sudden you don't have to resort to closing down businesses, because you have dealt with it in the most effective way, and that's the vaccine.
Well, except for now you need boosters, and it's back in a different variant.
Well, that's why, why that is, though, Eric? Because people took too long to get the shot. And in the time it took them to decide to get the shot, the virus has mutated. And that if people embraced it like they did polio or measles or whooping cough or smallpox, if people had said, I want to do this for myself, my family, and for my community.
It would have been interesting had that been the response. I don't disagree. If you played that out, it'd be interesting how that looked. So when we talk about me, you ask about me getting my vaccine. How did that make you feel when I chose to get the vaccine?
When you sent me that picture of your vaccine card, I burst into tears because I thought, you are loved by me, by extended family, by friends. And I thought, if we lose you because you're being stubborn, how heartbreaking that would be. And that I just was so appreciative of your willingness to do that. So
it's a nice thing to say.
Well,
and you were the first person I told because I knew it was important to you, and I didn't not do it to torture you and
I know
you need to come to that place where you make those kind of decisions, so that you can justify, should I do this or should I not?
And I want to thank you, Nancy and Eric, for joining us this evening for this reflection on your One Small Step conversation with each other. So thank you very much. Let's start off with, what was your experience with doing One Small Step like?
You start.
So it was very enjoyable, and I think it was surprised where some of the conversation went, because Nancy and I have known each other a long time, and I think we know each other well. But to come out of that, learning new things about her and about her views, and was good. And, it flowed. It was surprisingly, when I was done, I was surprised at the takeaway, because I didn't expect to come in and learn new things necessarily about her. And so that was really a neat experience.
I think it gave us a chance to kind of get some questions answered. I'm the oldest, Eric's the youngest, and we've oftentimes stated, well, why are we different? I'm definitely more liberal than he is. And, how did that come to be? And I think our conversation really gave me some insight as to why why we are different. I mean, we have lots of similar things too, but we're definitely different. And part of it was just the societal trends going on during our lifetimes.
Do you want to walk us through that just briefly about that difference of coming of age at different time periods?
Well, I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s, and it was a time of, of rebellion and revolution and trying new things and throwing away the old and kind of minimizing some of those expectations that we had for ourselves and our families had for us. And so I knew that. But then when Eric talked about his influences.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the big takeaways is how much impact you are, how impacted you are by your experience from maybe, 8 to 18 or 8 to 20. And we definitely grew up in different, from 8 to 20 was a decade difference between us and what was going on in the world and in this country. And I see how that stamped her personality more. And I had never really thought about it till this interview. I had never really, thought about that kind of impact. But I am learning, how impacted we are as kids. And so how our values and our interests and our passions are molded as kids. So that was probably one of the big takeaways.
Well, and, I was being influenced by, the hippie generation and, the war and all of that. And Eric was at the same age, was being influenced by Ronald Reagan and what his message was for the country. And so Eric would talk to our parents when they were having dinner about, well, first of all, his hippie sister, I think, but how, what was going on with politics, because we were definitely a political family. And so that was cool. I mean, we knew about the 60s, but I didn't realize how much of an impact the 80s could have.
Well, you think about college, and it's like when she went to college, it was very much long hair. It was just more of the hippie movement. And when I came to college, the dress had, it had really swung more conservative, very preppy style, and the alligator shirts. And I mean, it had moved to shorter hair, and it had moved to a much more conservative feel at school. Fraternity sororities were popular again, where they really weren't in the 70s. So there was a lot of change all the way through, the college years.
People are going to be coming together this holiday season like you are and your family, and they're going to have different perspectives. Did going through this experience with One Small Step have any bearing on that for you?
I do think it gave us pause to kind of look at what else might be going on. And then the other thing I think I think we started this whole thing partly because I'm dear friends with the person who's setting up all this, but the other thing was addressing the COVID vaccine at the beginning, probably a year ago?
Mm-hmm.
And we had gone back and forth about having the vaccine, not having the vaccine. And by the time, but I think going through that was an opportunity to express, because I was all over that. And but I did it not because I'm a bossy big sister, but because I wanted Eric to be okay. And, that was, I think, having an opportunity to tell somebody how much they mean to you and how much you care about them was part of what we did during that conversation.
Mm-hmm. And I think as we get older, I know with our other two siblings that are surviving siblings, I think we have relaxed a lot in the way we engage with each other. And I think as you get older, you start having more gratitude and appreciation, and you start realizing how precious certain relationships are and time together, that you don't want to argue about silly things because you're not around each other like you were all the time back in the day. So you don't want to spend the precious time you have arguing about things that you're not going to change about each other. I think Nancy and I have talked a lot with my time in Lawrence about our other siblings, and just when we're getting together, we seem to just be more comfortable and relaxed and just enjoying life a little more than maybe we were 20 years ago, where everybody, I think, had felt a lot of drive or need to prove things. And I think that's reflective in how less arguing, less having to convince the other person. You just get into more of an acceptance role with each other, I think. And this interview really kind of confirmed that or supported that, what's been happening, I think.
Well, thank you so much. Any final thoughts?
It was a nice opportunity. Thank you.
Yeah, it was fun. Thank you. I appreciate you thinking of us.
All right. Thank you so much for spending time with us this evening and for participating in One Small Step, Nancy Harness and Eric Keller. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn, Eric, and Nancy. I love how those siblings found common ground around health and safety. Hi, I'm Deborah Bolton. I'm the other facilitator for High Plains Public Radio's One Small Step project. Out of the 26 conversations that we had, it was really hard to boil down that one impactful moment. Early in our project for One Small Step, we gathered at the Lead for America House. It was called the Friendship House in Dodge City, Kansas. Kate Schiefrich and Jane Lindemood discussed their views on religion, and I think that you'll find what you're hearing very interesting. I hope you like it.
So as someone that grew up in the Catholic Church, still as a person of faith, but no longer in the Catholic Church, is there anything about Catholic teaching that you don't agree with?
The largest issue that I have with the Catholic Church is the persistence of clericalism, the persistence of the privileging of the priesthood, the non-questioning of the priests, the bishops, and their actions. The first major report on child sexual abuse in the Catholic Church was written in the 1980s. It is 2021, and there has not been significant progress in holding not just the individual priests that perpetrated this, but the bishops that allowed it, that knew about it, that sheltered, that transferred. Nothing. That's unconscionable. With the Catholic Church as it stands right now, I have some hope, faith that Pope Francis seems to be making moves in that direction. But there's enough weight in the anti-Francis faction, the Catholic hierarchy in general, that I don't have faith that what Francis wants to do, he will be able to do. I'd like to return that question to you. As an intelligent, thoughtful, spiritual, single woman, when you look at the Catholic Church with its many beautiful things, but its many flaws as well, what keeps you there?
That's a great question. I think the institution of the church is both human and divine. And I think that the human side of the church, as exclaimed, is very broken. But that doesn't change the reality of the divine nature of the church. And I believe that the Catholic Church is the church that Jesus founded, and he said, the gates of hell will not prevail against it. And while the human side is very broken, I think human sin doesn't change what Christ did for us. It doesn't change objective truth. I think the church is a source of objective truth. The human institution is broken. I think that the truth is just so much bigger than that human sin. I also think the sacraments are what keeps me in the church. The Eucharist is such a profound experience and anchor in my life that, truly receiving, really believing that the presence of Jesus is in the Eucharist, and being able to receive that, you know, every Sunday, sometimes more. Like I think especially in the last year, I've just like fallen very deeply in love with the Eucharist.
Good evening. So glad to have you here. I'm Deborah Bolton, and I'm joined by Kate Schiefrick and Jane Lindemood. We're really glad to have you here this evening as we have this listening event for One Small Step. Very excited about that. One of the things I wanted to ask you about are, of course, we'll be talking about your experiences in One Small Step. And how are you doing?
Great.
Good.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. Well, I have featured some of your conversation on a national scale. And so I just wanted to follow up with you to see what was your experience? What was your experience in your One Small Step conversation? We'll start with you, Kate.
Yeah, I loved this project. I think it's a great idea. And my personal experience was just that it was a real joy to connect with someone that, you know, I had met Jane before, but not really gotten to know her. And it was just really a joy to get to know a neighbor in my community that I hadn't gotten the opportunity before.
Very good. What about you, Jane?
Well, the same. When I met Kate, it was, I was a member of a group that she was presenting to. So we weren't really able to have a one-on-one conversation and really talk or chat with each other at all. So it was nice to be able to sit down and chat.
Great. Did you feel like there were any lessons that you learned, whether it was about one another or lessons about yourself in this process?
I don't know if it was a lesson per se, but I think I would say just kind of a recognition and realization that grief is universal, that death is sacred, and that there are universals in human experience, no matter where you're coming from.
What would you say to that, Kate?
Yeah, I think just like the power of connecting with a neighbor, like with anyone, but like especially with the people that you share community with. I think that's something that I maybe had like considered or thought about before the experience of One Small Step, but certainly that like this conversation and you know, the opportunity to get to know Jane really reiterated and affirmed for me just that how important it is to find space and opportunity to get to know those neighbors that are outside of my like immediate circle of existence.
Wow. And as I was listening to the two of you converse during your One Small Step conversation, I took lots of notes, as we do as facilitators. And I remember at one point where you were coming up with these realizations. There were some tearful moments that I shared with both of you. There were some laughing moments that I shared with both of you. One of these really great moments is when I took a picture of you kind of toasting with your cups of coffee. And I mean, you just brought such joy to the process. And speaking of One Small Step and our mission to connect people, do you feel like the project made a difference, whether it was with you personally or in the grand scheme of things?
Why don't you go ahead and go first this time, Kate?
Okay, sure. Yeah, I think that like in my work here in Dodge City, like dialogue and getting people to talk to each other is something that like I'm working for all of the time. And I think that it's really those like one-on-one relationships that can change a culture or change a community. And so I think I got the impression that like both Jane and I are like open to dialogue and probably were prior to this experience. But I certainly think like this concept of like one conversation at a time, like finding common ground and like forming relationships and like building social, like strong social fabric of a community, one conversation at a time is like really valuable and really, just really important for like building a strong community. So I certainly think that it's a really valuable project and experience for sure.
I would ask you the same thing, Jane.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe Kate and I had a little bit of an advantage in that we're both, to some degree, professional communicators. Myself as a teacher and Kate in the work she does. So I think we have some skills in listening and speaking beyond an agenda. And the one small step non-agenda agenda I think is really important to say, we know we got differences, but we also know we have commonalities. And to start from that base of community and commonality and make building that the agenda rather than coming in with a one-upsmanship or prove my point or conflict itself being the agenda. I think that's something that is unfortunately becoming more and more common. When you look this past fall at confrontational school board meetings and confrontational community board or city council meetings across the country, when people come in with confrontation as an agenda rather than communication, it doesn't work. Nobody ends up happy. But when you come in with the agenda of starting from common ground and exploring difference with an eye towards understanding rather than proving a point or winning a point of some sort, it makes a real difference.
I think I agree with both of you on that. Just having witnessed so many people with actually differing points of view come together and go, yeah. So based on that idea, were there any aha moments during the conversation or as a result of the conversation that either of you have? Kate?
Yeah, I think I'll like kind of backtrack to what Jane was saying in the beginning about that, like the universal experience of like grief and experiencing death. I think that was striking to me about our conversation and was something I walked away with. Yeah, how about you, Jane?
Well, I'd say I think I spoke it earlier in terms of aha moments. Again, just for all that we think of ourselves as being different and unique, which we all certainly are, there is still a universality in human experience that if we open ourselves to it, is a good starting place for building community and conversation. If we're willing to be vulnerable and if we're willing to allow the person, be safe for the other person that we're talking with.
Yes. Well, as we wrap this conversation up, I'm wondering, do you either of you have a question for the other? Can you think of anything to ask as a final thing, or have you made connections since your conversation?
We
you both have your jobs.
Well, Kate is working on a project of setting up conversational forums. I want to say Chautauqua, and that's not the right.
The Lyceum.
Lyceum.
Yeah.
Okay. And a good friend of mine, Jan Scoggins, went to one and came back to the women's group that I'm a part of, and just had wonderful things to say. So I'm hoping to see Kate again in that context, because I know the next one's getting planned, and I think she's got some great things going on. So I just hope to see her again in the community and make more connection that way.
So Kate, you're taking one small step further into bigger steps in your community with your Lyceum movement.
That's the hope, yeah, to create like that type of intentional, relationship building environment and make that available to the general, anyone that's interested in the community. So that's the dream, yeah.
What's bumper?
I love that your cats are in there, Jane, and everybody in the part of it. I like the little heads sitting there. Well, I'd sure like to thank both of you for taking this time with me this evening. So, because I was interested, actually, you two, I think, were my second face-to-face, in-person conversation, because a lot of them that we're doing are virtual, and we've done about 8 in person, and it's a different experience than the virtual. I find that people are still making the same kinds of connections that you two made. So thank you for being part of this. I hope our paths cross again, and keep listening. Thanks for being here tonight.
Thank you again for joining High Plains Public Radio tonight for the first of what we hope will be several such special webcasts of our One Small Step conversations. We're grateful to those of you who signed up and took the first small step to foster dialogue here on the High Plains. My thanks especially to field producers and facilitators Lynn Boitano and Deborah Bolton. Thanks also to Jake Keebler for his production work and to Marva Clark for her project management. The talent of HPPR's volunteer webmaster Beata McCall has been very critical for producing this webcast, and we thank her for her good work. And we also thank Jacqueline Van Meter, the radio relations manager nationally for One Small Step, who traveled all the way to Garden City to make sure we had everything we needed and to make sure this program was a success. And of course, thank you for your support of public radio and HPPR. If you'd like to find out more about the One Small Step program or learn more about how to listen to archived interviews, please visit our website at hppr.org. And while there, perhaps consider financially supporting the mission of High Plains Public Radio. I'm Quentin Hope, thanking you and wishing you a good evening.